Cheers to you.
How you doing?
I'm great. It's wonderful to have you with us.
Well, good to be here. You know, you'd be amused to see my setup here. I got a little thing attached literally to the stair rail of the brew house itself. You know, so if you want to, actually, I can show you a picture of what. I just took a picture a minute ago of like what this crazy setup looks like. You know, so I'm looking at you, and this is actually like the phone, like on the way up the steps of the brew house. So I just finished up a whole bunch of meetings. We're blending up some stuff. We're tasting some things, and I just run off here, into the brew house. I have not had any lunch yet, but I want to be able to join you here today because we've been talking for a few months now. And, I'm glad we're able to do this. Let me just grab this water over here.
You know, since I'm traveling, I don't have my normal setup. I have my phone sitting in a cup right now. That's my tripod.
I'm telling you, that's the way it works these days, man. I tell the kids, they're talking to me about DIY culture, and it's like, you want to see some DIY people, like meet some brewers. You know, I know how to make a car out of duct tape. And the thing will run, so it's all good. So here we are at Brooklyn Brewery. Later if you want to go unmoored.
Open today.
What do you say?
Yeah. Your tasting room just opened today.
We are just opening our tap room to the public today. This is the first day, obviously, of reopening of bars and restaurants indoors in New York City. So I had originally actually planned to do this out in the tasting room where there's not quite as much noise as there is in the brew house proper, and didn't really realize that suddenly there were all these people in here getting ready to open us back up to the public again. But hopefully this all goes well for everybody, and we wish all the other bars and restaurants and whatever else good luck in this next phase. It's been a weird time, and it's hopefully we'll stay good.
Well, I have to say I've always been a fan. I know I definitely know Brooklyn Brewery from neighborhood. I'm not in that specific neighborhood, but I am a Brooklyn guy. So going from Bushwick on over in Williamsburg, I used to be in Williamsburg. Just spending time at the brewery, it's wonderful. So if anybody who's on here gets a chance, definitely visit the brewery.
Well, much appreciated. And of course, these days, many people don't know that, Brooklyn was one of the great brewing centers of the world. When you go back to the 1800s, into the early 1900s, 15% of all the beer in the United States was brewed in Brooklyn. We had 48 breweries. They centered from this area all the way into Bushwick, an area that was known as the Brewer's Row or the Brewer's Mile, and it went much further than a mile. And now out there you have a resurgence of all the younger breweries, that are out there now. Everybody from Evil Twin to Interborough to Grimm, out in that direction. And we were among the first really new modern businesses here in Williamsburg, starting back, this brew house opened in 1996. And believe you me, Williamsburg in 1996, it was, shall we say, a little rough. So like when it got dark, you didn't see anybody on the street. And if you did, you crossed the street to the other side. If they followed behind you, you put, your hand in your pocket, you pretended to have a gun. And that was Williamsburg back in the day. We used to have raves in empty buildings that are now not even there anymore. Things were a lot different. It was not the Disneyland of cash that you see, when you go to Williamsburg these days. So very different.
So one of the things I'm really curious about is I'm just going to jump into this ahead of time.
Yeah, please.
Being a person of color, I saw that you do all this work with the Michael James Jackson Foundation, and being a person of color, I appreciate this. I have many friends of color in no, actually, I have to say I don't have that many friends of color in the industry, and
Nobody does.
Just being able to help increase the number of people of color in the industry, I think, is amazing. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that a little first.
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is themjf.org. TheMJF.org, Michael Jackson Foundation. It's actually the Michael James Jackson Foundation, so that you don't get confused with some other Michael Jackson. For people who don't know who he was, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he was the greatest beer writer in the world and was simultaneously the top-selling whiskey writer in the world. The sales of his, no one has come anywhere close to the sales of his books, and his writing basically established the way we talk about beer today. Things like beer styles and the way that they're arranged and the way that we judge them in competition, basically everything. And so, he was also a great friend of mine and a distinctively anti-racist individual. For many years, he was one of the breezes under my wings, and it's great to be able to honor him in the MJF Foundation. So what we are doing here, as you said, when you look at the beverage industry, you don't see many people of color inside the beverage industry working, especially on the brew house side or in distilling. People ask me, why is this? Is it it must be that, black people, Latinos, Asians, they're not really into craft beer. What you find out is that this is not true. So I asked people, if they were of European background, to reverse the situations in their minds for a moment. Suppose every time you wanted a really great craft beer and you were going to go out, in the before times when we could go out, when you went out to get a great cocktail or a great craft beer, every single time you went out, when you went into those bars, everybody else in there was black. And you were the only white person in the whole place every time. How would that be? Now, you can say, oh, I'd be fine. But really? Like every day? People don't look at this the way people of non-Asian background tend to look at, say, an Asian restaurant. You go into the restaurant, you see it's all Asian people, you're like, wow, it's all that means the food's really good, right? Well, the whole idea of authenticity does not run that way in the beer world. If people saw beer as being black or Latino or Asian, they might feel that way, but they don't. They think of it as European, which it isn't. So that's where we start. If you go back to revolutionary times, all the beer in the United States was made by black people. All of it. Before the Civil War, all of it. Guess who was doing the work? All the work. So, every single society, north to south, east to west, in Africa, traditionally is focused around brewing in the village. It's a big part of African culture. So my point is, this belongs to all of us, the beer world. The reason why we've been excluded as people of color from brew houses and distilling houses is the same reasons why we've been excluded from many other things. And we can get into, institutional racism in the United States and whatever else. But what we are doing with the Michael James Jackson Foundation is trying to reverse that by providing scholarships together with mentorship for people of color who are taking technical courses within the brewing and distilling industry. Yeah. Now, I'm hearing a squeak in here somewhere, and I don't hear it in this room. It's coming out of my speaker. Do you hear anything?
I actually don't.
All right. As long as it's sounding fine on your end, I'm getting some weird sound. Of course, I always sound like this because I'm in the brew house.
You're gonna hear this sound. Though. I'm gonna open up one of your creations right here.
Awesome. Okay. Well, the one you've got right there is called Bel Air, and Bel Air is our first kind of regularly available sour beer. For those of you who have not had sour beers before, again, when you look at craft beer, we often think of craft beer as being all about innovation, and yes, this is true, but, sour beers actually are not modern in any way. If you went back to Berlin, in the 1800s, you would have found over 100 breweries that made nothing but sour beer. So the world of beer has traditionally been broken up into two sides, like most of the drinks. If you look at cocktails, drinks, by and large, there are exceptions, but cocktails are either sour cocktails based on acid, usually lime or lemon juice, or they're based on bitters, bitter cocktails, like old fashions and Manhattans. You get the same thing in the wine world. White wine more about acid, red wine more about tannin when it comes to structure. Same thing in the beer world. You had sour beers and you had bitter beers. What happened in the modern age is that we cut away the entire sour range of beers, which people used to know about and they really loved, but don't really know anymore. And it turns out that when you bring these flavors back, of course people love them. People drink acidic drinks pretty much their entire lives. They start off in a lemonade stand when they're a kid. They later move into margaritas and into champagne and whatever else. Acid has always been a big part of the drinks world. And so when people say, oh, sour beer, no one's going to drink that, they're crazy. Of course people are going to drink that if it tastes good. How do we do it? Well, in tanks like this, we take the wort, which is the original liquid that's going to ferment into beer. We add to it a lactobacillus, which is the same souring organism that is used to give acidity to yogurt, give acidity to sauerkraut. Many of you might be making traditional pickles at home. I'm fermenting hot sauces right now, lactic fermentation. So we're doing this rapidly over the course of about 48 hours. In a tank like this one, we will drop the pH of that tank, and now we have an acidic wort, and then we'll send it in front of me here, you can't see it right now, to the kettle, and we will boil it and put it through a normal brewing process. Ferment it with a regular yeast, but we have the acidity and the flavors that were developed by that lactic acid bacteria. When you smell and taste the Bel Air, that pineapple-like tropical aroma that you're getting was developed by the bacterial strain during the lactic phase of the production. So we all know if we do fermentation at home, if you do lactic fermentation at home, that there's a big difference between a pickle which was fermented to be sour and a pickle which you put in vinegar. They have two different kinds of acid. One is acetic acid, the other one is lactic acid. And you develop all this umami, this really rich, deep flavor, in a fermented pickle, which you do not get in basically a pickle steeped in acid. The same thing happens with, our beer. You could take a beer and you could just dump lactic acid in it, right? And it would turn sour. But you're not going to get a very nice flavor. And you're not going to develop all these tropical flavors that you're getting in a beer like Bel Air. Now, we've used Bel Air now as a base to do a whole range of other beers. Some of them have been specialties, which have been aged in barrels. Right now, and it's coming to the United States too, in Australia, we've started to produce a raspberry version. Here's a fun fact that you probably don't know. Brooklyn beer is sold in 38 countries, and outside of the New York area, the biggest market for Brooklyn beer is Sweden, which only has 10 million people. They drink ridiculous amounts of Brooklyn beer. Behind Sweden comes UK and France. France is like our number 4 market. If you went to Paris now, Brooklyn beer is everywhere. So we actually sell slightly more beer outside the United States than in the United States.
When we were able to travel, actually.
Yeah, well, normally this time of year, this would be my heaviest travel period of the year. This is like when Oktoberfest happens. This is when the Great American Beer Festival happens. It's like I would probably be on the road pretty much for 5, 6, 7 weeks right now doing all kinds of stuff. So it's pretty bizarre to be staying at home right now.
Now, we had some text about, I guess, all the habaneros that all the habaneros we're working on, and I told you I was working on a habanero kimchi that I started off with some yogurt. So, I mean, this is great because sometimes people see certain beers, and more or less, some of these beer companies have taken their base and they've added chocolate, or they've added, different flavors to it. And I love the fact that everything you're working with is not just added, it's integrated, which is very important. And people don't understand the difference between the two.
Well, I think that when you think about it, people tend to think of, your nearest peers as a brewer must be winemakers, right? No, our nearest peers are chefs. The thing is, yes, beer is in a way an agricultural product in that, we grow the hops, we grow the malt, the barley, etc. But beer has a recipe, which is something that wine should have one ingredient, right? Grapes. The way that beer is produced, the way that you have creativity around beer is the opposite of that of wine. What you traditionally are looking to do, especially if you're in the world of natural winemaking, is you are growing these grapes, you're working in the vineyard, and then you're expressing terroir, which is the land, the environment, the earth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is not what we are doing. We have the idea first here. And then you're like, okay, how do I produce this flavor? Which is exactly what a chef does. So, there is a recipe, there is a procedure, and we are trying to hit a target, which is a very different idea. Yes, we have things that we do that involve serendipity, and there are types of beers that are like that. But if we're looking to make Brooklyn Lager today, we want it to taste exactly like Brooklyn Lager, which is exactly what you want if you go and buy it in the shop. You don't want to say, I wonder how Brooklyn Lager is today. You're trying to nail this thing. So it's definitely a different mindset that's going on.
I sometimes talk to some whiskey drinkers. I'm a big whiskey drinker too, and people talk about single malts. I do love single malts, but there is an artistry to blends that people don't understand. If you can have the blend taste the same year after year after year, your sense of taste must be damn amazing. Number one, but also,
I think what you develop
is an incredible scientific process. The chemistry behind making sure that this tastes the same every year is amazing. And I think people just think that a lot of beer makers, winemakers, as well as distillers are just a bunch of cowboys and just kind of throw it together. They don't understand the depth in it. I'm just going to plug you really quick. The Oxford Companion to beer that you worked on. It's a beer Bible to many people. It is to me, that's for sure.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's four and a half years of work, 166 writers from 22 countries, 1,120 subjects. So it was an insane piece of work to take on, but it was one that needed doing, and I'm proud that we were able to do it. It's such a big. The world of beer is bigger than the world of wine by far. Much more. People spend a lot more money on craft beer in the United States than they do on wine that costs more than, say, $8 a bottle. So if you look at what you want to call craft wine, like better wine, not $2 chuck kind of things, but things that are above that. The average people think about American wine, and there's so much great American wine, but the actual story of American wine is a bag-and-box or a jug with a finger lube. That's 90% of the market. The stuff that you and I think about, is the high end. And it's the same with beer. It's like you and I might interact with the 15% on top of the whiskey market, the top of the sake market, top of the mezcal market, top of the beer market, but that's not where most people are actually living.
I think a lot of people have certain notions about wine for sure, that all this stuff you're aging, and really statistically, it's only 7 to 10% of wine made each year, which is made for long-term aging. Most of you drink young. And
most wine that's bought in the United States is drunk within 24 hours, and it will not be better on any future day than it is right now.
I'm just going to jump now to the Oktoberfest. I've already started drinking it, to be honest. And I have to say, this was one of the best Oktoberfests from you guys I've had, I guess, over the years. I don't know if it's changed slightly, or maybe I'm just imagining it, but I'm very happy drinking this.
Oh, well, thanks. We actually do have some some new, better equipment. So I think that even though the recipe hasn't changed, I think that we're making steady improvements over the years. I mean, it's always been one of my favorite beers. What is strange about Oktoberfest now is that we are producing Oktoberfest that is much more traditional than any Oktoberfest that you would actually see if you went to the Oktoberfest in Germany. Why is that? Well, 20 plus years ago, say 25 years ago, when I was first at Oktoberfest, all the Oktoberfest beer that you saw was the color of the beer in front of you right now. The style is also known as Märzen beer. And Märzen means March, and that's because the beer was basically brewed in March, which was the last point in the year where you could reliably brew beer. And you're going back to like the 1600s, 1500s, and people knew that once it got warm, beer would sour. These were not beers that were supposed to be sour, so they would stop brewing by April. And then they would pick up brewing when the weather got cool again in October. And so the last beer of the season, the Märzen beer, the March beer, would be brewed strong, then aged in caves where it was cold, until basically the end of the harvest season. And the Oktoberfest and the harvest festivals all came together into one thing. So this was a style. It was dark. It was made from a style of malt called Vienna malt, which has a little bit of caramelization to it. It had a coffee-like flavor, toffee-like flavor, I should say, and aroma. And now you go to Oktoberfest, and all the beer is golden. And this is because at Oktoberfest, they sell so much beer over those 2 weeks. Well, they would in other years. Obviously, Oktoberfest is not happening this year. That they said they did some studies and said, well, if the beer was golden, people would drink like 20% more of it, because people in the modern era don't drink that much darker beer. They drink golden beer. And so all the German breweries actually lighten their beer to be the same color as Pilsner, whereas Americans like us are keeping to the old tradition. So you actually have a strange situation where our Oktoberfest is more German than German Oktoberfest. So, Prost.
All right, I have one other beer that I just wanted to touch base on, because it's going to be very different. I mean, not just a presentation, but than a lot of other beers from you guys. Basically, it's not coming in this or this. I want to get different formats. So, I'll just pop this open and.
Yeah, well, I unfortunately can't be drinking at the moment because I have a lot more work to do today here at the brewery. People think that like at a brewery you're just like, oh, you're just sitting around like drinking all day, whatever else. Actually, like we normally don't even drink at lunch. Though these days, we have a non-alcoholic beer called Special Effects. And I actually do drink Special Effects with lunch because it has 0.5% alcohol. So in front of you here, you have Black Ops. And Black Ops is Imperial Stout, aged in bourbon barrels. In the past, we used other barrels, which were very good. But last year, we started a new thing where we paired up with our friends at Four Roses in Kentucky. And we are aging all the Black Ops in Four Roses small batch barrels. Now, if you know Four Roses small batch, you know that this is not an inexpensive whiskey. It's also very, very good. And it has really taken Black Ops to a whole new level. The beer spends a year in wood, and then after that, it undergoes secondary fermentation in the bottle, which gives it a very different texture and flavor than other barrel-aged imperial stouts you might see. We first started brewing this beer back in 2006, when barrel-aged beers were not very common, though they were certainly known at the time. They were not very common. And the reason why the beer was called Black Ops was because we hid it even from everyone at the brewery, because our salespeople were worried that if we made a small amount of a barrel-aged beer, that everybody would want it, and that they would be blamed for their inability to deliver it to people like you. Because, you know,
I was just wondering if
the retailers,
I thought maybe it had a military connotation, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like you had a lot of guys that were like, how come you can't deliver me 100 cases right now? And you're like, well, I only have 100 cases. They'd be like, okay, we don't want Brooklyn Lager anymore. I thought you were my friend. Hang up the phone on you. So for the first year, we didn't sell it. We just gave it away to our friends and people who worked at the brewery. And then it kind of turned into a mini legend. And the next year, we did like 900 cases of it. And we never have produced very much. It's not that easy to find. It is not cheap, but it is very, very beautiful. So what do we get from the barrel? All the flavors that are pulled out into bourbon from the barrel. There are lignans, which are kind of the wood flavors themselves, coconut-like flavors, vanilla-like flavors. You also have the softening of the characteristics of the beer through micro-oxygenation. That's the oxygen that naturally comes through the pores of the wood. And then the flavors of the individual bourbons, that make up Four Roses small batch. So all of those are coming together to create something particularly beautiful. We're just really super proud of that beer. It's great as dessert by itself or with a cigar, but it's also a great dessert beer. Pairs up beautifully with vanilla ice cream. It's also great with certain cheeses, especially Stilton. I know that you guys, people don't realize, often you guys will have a good cheese department, and so you put all this stuff together, you have some beautiful pairings. You have Black Ops with cheesecake. Okay, so you have the roasted malts giving you chocolate and coffee flavors. You have the barrel giving you vanilla and coconut flavors, and then mentally put that together with cheesecake, and that's going to be good. You can put a scoop of it, a vanilla ice cream in Black Ops, which I know is people say, oh my God, how can you put vanilla ice cream in such an expensive barrel-aged beer? Well, because it tastes really, really good, which is beer's job, is to taste really, really good. So if it tastes really, really good with some ice cream in it, I give you special dispensation that you can put ice cream in your Black Ops, and Brewmaster is not mad.
Yeah, one of our philosophies with this channel, Be Your Own Bartender, is it all started because of the pandemic. People couldn't go to bars, so they need to start serving themselves, but also getting creative too. But it also applies to food, and I think food and wine, people usually think the two go together, and they forget about beer. And I tell this to everyone all the time. Now, I studied wine tremendously, so a lot of my wine nerd friends are going to get mad when I say this, but beer goes with so much more food than wine.
It just does. I mean, here's the thing. I'm a big wine fan. Most of my friends are in the wine business. I could sit here and talk to you about Riesling and Alsace Riesling versus German Riesling versus Austrian Riesling. I could talk about Nebbiolo in different regions, what it's like in Valtellina, versus Piemonte. I could geek all the way out. I could talk about natural wines versus manipulations. I do know my wine, but remember, one ingredient. All right, so you got this grape. It's a great ingredient. Love that grape, but you cannot in any way come close to what we can do in the beer world. The range of flavors within the beer world are so much wider, than exists in the wine world, that from a culinary point of view, I've done beer versus wine with cheese, beer versus wine with various dishes in front of an audience, and there are two kinds of sommeliers: the ones who know they're going to lose and the ones who don't know they're going to lose. but they're all going to lose. You cannot defeat beer in a culinary setting, and this is because the matchup is just not fair. It's not fair. I can do everything. I can have a beer that's spiced. I can have a beer that's sweet and has smoky flavors to it. I can have a beer that is light and ethereal, like a wheat beer. I can have a sour beer. I can have a super funky, barrel-aged lambic beer. I can add fruit. I can make beer that tastes like wine, almost exactly like wine. So everything that the wine guy can do, I can do, and then I can do 80 other things. And so there's just no way that you can possibly do that stuff. I mean, you watch people trying to take, beer, wine, say, into a Thai restaurant, like a serious Thai restaurant. And that German Riesling might get you up to like 4 on the Thai scale of heat. But beyond that point, you simply can't get any further. Your wine's going to turn into furniture polish in your mouth, and it's just not going to work. Whereas there are other drinks that can work a lot better, and beer is one of them.
I would also have to say culturally, there's a big reason why beer can go with more foods. It's just because you don't have wine culture all over the world. You don't have it in every country. Maybe some countries are starting to make wine, but it's still fairly new in a lot of these I guess, new wine countries. People talk about China, let's say. China is starting to make a lot more wine, but they've been drinking beer for a long time. They're the second largest buyer of Guinness in the world, and it's been going on since the 80s.
Yeah.
So there's a beer culture everywhere. I went to Colombia about 3 years ago, and there are wines there. Most of them are going to be from Chile and Argentina. There is wine made in Colombia, but there are breweries everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And what's interesting about South America is that, like many of them, they are the indigenous beers, which are usually corn-based. And then you had the European beers. Now, South America has a very similar background generally to the United States. They may have had immigration from different areas. But if you go to Argentina, like people think of Argentina as being Spanish. Argentina is Italian. Argentina is like really Italian. They may speak Spanish, but they're culturally like very Italian plus German. Like you go to Peru, how do you get a name like Alberto Fujimori? Well, you had large Japanese immigration, into South America. You had Germans who were fleeing to Brazil, which is where the Brazilian brewing scene originally came from. You had Germans all over South America. We tend to call it Latin America, and we think that it's all Spanish. It's not. It's this blend of that. You had people that were sent over from Africa, and they brought their own brewing traditions. And all this stuff is this mishmash of culture, which then bubbles down through all the fermented drinks, that are going on, in these different countries. And last night, I was just tasting a whole different range of shochus. And I didn't really know that much about Japanese shochu. Now, people don't realize there is much more shochu drunk in Japan than sake. We hear about sake, but when you go to Japan, like shochu is like the big fermented drink, and beer. When people go out for sushi, like they're often getting beer. When people go out in Spain for tapas, they're getting beer. It's like beer is universal.
Now, one of the things I've also noticed about beer, one of the things I realized, I should say, is if people think about the ingredients, what goes into it. Obviously you can use many different types of grains, but grains are much more widely planted, whether it's barley or whatever, than so many grapes. Grapes can't grow everywhere. That's what it really comes down to. Obviously it goes hand in hand with, spirits too. But I point that out to people is that so many grains, they're let's say tougher stock for growing.
Yeah.
It comes down to it.
Well, and if you go throughout Africa, your grains, your beers were not always based on barley. Sometimes they were. Sometimes they were based on millet types. Grains like fonio, which now the chef Pierre Chiem is really helping bring back to people, in the United States, through his company Yolele, and we're actually making beer from fonio, which is a old millet type. In the southern part of Africa, you have sorghum-based beers, which are still very widely made. You have wheat-based beers. So whatever kind of grain grew in a particular area was what people made their beer from. And you would have seen the same thing even in colonial times. When people were working on farms, they might largely use barley, but if they had oats, they were growing also wheat, they're growing this, they're growing that, they're growing sorghum, it would all end up, in the beer. That's where, you are a robust man, my friend. Like, that's some 12.7% beer that you're drinking at 2:43 in the afternoon. You're a better man than I am. I'd be on the floor by now. But yeah, I mean, in Europe, what they call like the grain belt, the beer belt, kind of starts in Belgium. You started to see the transition, and you go south of that, you're going to see more wine, and you go north of that, you're going to see more beer, and that belt kind of runs across Europe. But even when you get into the southern parts, of Europe, like Spain, you still see, large beer consumption, and big breweries, and a really serious, brewing culture that's springing up that ironically comes out of the United States. We were the first to kind of bring back beer from industrialization, and now people look to the United States as kind of the leaders for creativity in beer, whereas you went back 25 years ago. I just posted on Instagram about IPA, like just before we started here. And you went back 25 years ago, people looked at the United States and they were like, American beer. It's like water. It's like, it's no good, etc. And now the situation is flipped.
Yeah, I mean, I think when people think about beers, there are some major brands. I'm not going to go into names or anything like that, but those brands became popular because they were the ones who were able to put out beer faster than the others once Prohibition ended. So those are the big names that came out, and they're heavily commercial and they're produced in large scale.
I'm about to do this.
They have less character, I meant to say. But I think when it comes down to craft beer culture, I'm just gonna I'm gonna start off when I was in college. I worked at a bar out in Buffalo. Unfortunately, it closed down, but it was called Alternative Brews, and they had I think it was about maybe 200 beers when I was there, and it was a great place for a college kid to learn how to drink better than what other college kids were drinking. And I would have to say that started me off before I even got into wine, before I even got into whiskeys and so forth. But just that quality of drink started off at this place, just learning so many different beers and then just going forth from there.
Well, certainly when I went to college,
it's a more universal drink when it comes down to it.
Yeah, well, when I went to college, there was nothing. I mean, there really, you had, I'll tell you the truth, it's like craft brewers like to make fun of big brewers, but, the honest truth is we drank Budweiser when we had money. If we had money, we drank Budweiser because at least to us, it tasted like water, but the beers that we could afford, they tasted much, much worse. So we got to be honest about this part. One reason why the current big brewers won is they actually were better. They were technically better. They were proficient. I mean, things like refrigeration technology and whatever else, these guys were on their game. Yes, they were the ones that opened fastest after Prohibition, because they still had money. Anheuser-Busch made, everything from ice cream to boats, during Prohibition. Anything that they needed to do, people did. And we obviously had Prohibition help produce the kind of blander American beer that we now know. But, these guys were very good at science. But this is the same science that gave us Wonder Bread and craft slices and whatever else. Standardization and the ability to hit your target every time. People often don't understand what you mean when you say the word quality. Quality from a technical standpoint, is not what you and I think of when we think of as quality, like it tastes great. That's a small part of quality. Quality within within that mindset is the ability to hit the target that you've tried to hit, and your ability to deliver to the consumer what the consumer expects. And the fact of the matter is that over the last 30 years, the big brewers have been better at that up until now than the small brewers. So these days, we're just in the last 5-10 years getting to the point where the craft brewers are as good and sometimes better than the big brewers at actual objective quality. If I say that, this is a 6-pack of Brooklyn Lager, and you're going to go spend $12.99 on it, or, whatever it is, that, to me, constitutes a promise. I promised you that it was going to be Brooklyn Lager, and that Brooklyn Lager was going to taste the same this time as it did last time. And we have to take that seriously. You might have worked for an hour to make that $12.99. You deserve to get the thing that you were promised. It's not a game, and we're not like a bunch of kids playing with toys. So our commitment to quality, is the same thing. It's yes, we want it to taste like Brooklyn Lager, and we want it to taste good, but we also want it to be the same every time that you get it, and you get the thing that you expected.
I have to say, I do love the consistency, but I'm always curious at all the different things coming out each year. That's for sure. So I love the variety.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There have been some years where we've made things are different this year with the pandemic, but there have been years where we've made 35 or 40 different beers. Just before everything shut down, if you came to our bar, you would have seen 15, 16, 17 beers on draft. We've always been about variety. We were the first brewery in the world to do collaborations. We were the first brewery in the world to make beers based on cocktails. We were among the first breweries in the United States to make real IPA, back in the mid-'90s. And like I said, I just posted on Instagram, on my Instagram, which is by Garrett Oliver, right there, about a conference that we had in 1994. It was an IPA conference in London, which I attended and brought beer to. It's been a wild ride. I've been at this for 30 years, and it's great to still be in the game and see so many people enjoying it.
So I just have two final things I'm curious about. First off, I know you're well traveled. I consider myself well traveled too, but would you say going to all these different cultures like Morocco and so forth, would you say a lot of that maybe influenced you, maybe from ingredients or from, I guess, the culture that you'd seen? That's number one.
Well, certainly, there's going to be an influence from cultures everywhere that you go. Not all of them are going to be obvious on their surface. Places like Brazil that have fruit that we don't even really know about. Like when I think about a fruit beer, I'm not just thinking about raspberry. I'm like, what are the fruits that you and I don't even know? That when you go to a fruit market in Brazil, the average American would recognize about 20% of the fruit. I could tell you, I was shocked when I found out, and literally this is 10, 15 years ago, where cashews came from. Now, I could tell you, okay, there's a bunch of people watching this, think about whether or not you know where cashews come from. And if you don't, look it up, because it's the freakiest thing you've ever heard.
But the fingers, I was reading about women in India and how damaging it is. It actually totally changed because I used to love making cashew cream as an alternative to heavy cream. And when I found out, I just felt guilty.
Yeah, I didn't even know about the fingers thing.
But about where their food comes from.
There's one nut hanging on this big fist-sized fruit, and so everybody in Brazil knows what cashew tastes like. And it's caju, CAJU with a and then from it we get the cashew nut. But caju juice is in every supermarket. We live in the United States, despite all the immigration that we have, we live in a very limited world of food. So when I go out there in the world, the worlds of food and drink, I'm always looking to discover new things. In October, I was in 5 cities in China, and I tasted a bunch of drinks I've never had before. Whether it's mijo, which is an old form of like rice wine, which technically is a misnomer because there's no such thing as rice wine. Wine comes when you squeeze a fruit and ferment it. When you convert a grain and ferment it, you get a beer, or you get a sake, or you get a mijo, or you get shochu. These are other grain-based drinks, and so these are ancient traditions in different parts of the world that Americans don't really know anything about, but all of these things that I travel around and learn end up eventually in our beers.
There's definitely so much to learn from the world, from different cultures to influence that for sure. So one last thing I have to ask is there anything you want to plug? Is there something coming down the pipe that you think we should keep an eye on?
Oh, right now, as I told you, of all things, non-alcoholic beers, are definitely, a thing that is coming on. Ours, Special Effects, is doing really well. Oktoberfest, obviously, this is the time of year for it. It is tasting great. Black Ops comes out. I can now say next month. Next month is now November. Can you believe it? This being October, and also, if people are interested in seeing, equity, diversity, inclusion, in the beer world, come look us up at the Michael James Jackson Foundation, themjf.org, and see if you can do your part, whether it is making a donation, to our scholarship fund. Because I think what we all want is to see everybody at the party. You see all the same people at a party. That's not as good a party as it could be if the party actually looked like America. And that's what I want to see. I want to see a beer business and a distilling business that look like America. Always better.
Those are great words right there, and I have to say that's one of the most patriotic things in our industry I've heard. That's for sure.
Well, we are patriots. Whatever you do, vote. All right. See you, man.
Garrett, I have to say it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to, of course, enjoy more of your amazing products, and I hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
Absolutely.
And, by the way, I'm definitely going to bring you some habanero kimchi.
Ah, awesome. I am totally down. I'll bring you some hot sauce. And now it's lunchtime. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I haven't eaten lunch yet, and I'm going to Shake Shack.
Sounds great.
All right. Talk to you soon.
So may the force be with you, by the way.
And may the force be with you.
Okay.
Always.
Hey, thank you very much.
Hey, ciao. And come see us at Brooklyn Brewery. We're open.
I definitely will. Yeah, everyone else should too.
All right.
Okay, thank you.